I thought she felt the same, but in the end, she chose him. It's punchy, emotionally charged, and immediately creates curiosity while hinting at the age gap, slow burn tension, and unrequited romance. The first time he saw her, it felt like the world had subtly shifted, though nothing obvious had changed. She was standing near the cafe counter, her posture graceful but relaxed, exuding a quiet confidence that drew every eye. Yet somehow, she remained unaware of it. He noticed the way her fingers lingered over the edge of her coffee cup, the way she absent-mindedly tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. There was a softness in her movements that contradicted her strong, self-assured presence, a vulnerability he couldn't quite name. He tried to look away, told himself she was just another person passing through life, yet his gaze kept returning. Her laugh, a gentle and almost musical sound, floated across the room and brushed against him like the softest breeze. It made his chest tighten, not with desire, but with the unexpected warmth of connection he had never felt before. When their hands almost brushed over a stack of books she was picking up, the fleeting contact sent a tiny spark up his arm, leaving him slightly breathless. It was such a small thing, yet it lingered in his mind long after she had moved away. There was an elegance about her that wasn't about appearance alone. Her confidence wasn't loud or showy. It was quiet, grounded in self-awareness. Yet beneath it, he sensed a fragile trace of something else. Maybe fatigue from life's weight, or perhaps the hesitancy of someone who had learned to be careful with her heart. He couldn't tell, but it made her presence feel more real, more human. He watched her from across the room as she adjusted her scarf, the fabric sliding softly over her shoulders. The movement was casual, yet intimate in a way that made him want to memorize it. He caught a glimpse of her eyes as they flickered toward him, a curious yet fleeting glance. And in that brief instant, a strange recognition passed between them, as if their worlds, normally separate, had brushed together. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words lodged in his throat. Instead, he simply nodded once, a small acknowledgement, hoping she noticed it in the briefest way. Inside, a quiet storm was forming. He was drawn to her, yes, but conflicted. She was older, more experienced, and he wasn't sure where he fit into her life, or if he even should. There was fear mingled with fascination, hesitation entwined with desire. His mind raced through possibilities, yet every scenario ended with the same unspoken question. What if he had misunderstood everything about the moment, about her, about himself? And still, he found himself returning to her image, replaying every movement, every laugh, every almost touch in his mind. Something had sparked, subtle but undeniable, and he sensed that this was only the beginning. The quiet pull of curiosity, admiration, and a strange tenderness had taken root, and he knew, deep down, that it would be impossible to ignore. The first glimpse was fleeting, almost ordinary, but to him, it felt like the start of something that would quietly unravel and reshape the way he understood connection, intimacy, and longing. After that first fleeting encounter, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Days passed, and yet her presence lingered, not in the physical sense, but in the quiet corners of his mind. Then, by what seemed like chance, or maybe fate, they met again. This time, there was no fleeting glance across a cafe. They stood face to face, talking over shared interests, a book she had just picked up, or a comment about the weather. The initial awkwardness melted quickly, replaced by the strange ease of someone who feels like they've known you longer than they actually have. Her voice was calm and steady, yet there was warmth threading through every word. It drew him in effortlessly, making the space around them shrink until it felt like they were in their own little world. He noticed how she tilted her head slightly when listening, how her eyes softened when she laughed at something he said. Every subtle motion, every micro-expression seemed magnified in his mind. There was something magnetic about her, the way she was fully present, yet somehow distant, protective of herself, but inviting enough to leave traces of trust. As they talked, small gestures created an invisible bridge between them. Her hand lightly brushed his arm as she reached for a book, and he felt an unexpected thrill, a gentle heat spreading through him, tinged with nervous anticipation. Her smile lingered longer than necessary when she responded to his joke, her eyes catching his in a way that made his heart stutter. He noticed how her perfume, soft and slightly floral, lingered in the air around her, making him acutely aware of her closeness without the need for words. In those moments, he saw her humanity more clearly than anyone else seemed to. She spoke candidly about her work, her hobbies, small regrets, and quiet joys. The vulnerability she revealed, carefully measured, only deepened his fascination. He felt a pull, not just physical or aesthetic, but emotional. He wanted to know her fully, to understand the layers beneath her polished exterior. Yet there was an unspoken caution in her eyes, a gentle restraint that suggested she had been hurt before and was careful whom she allowed in. Despite this, she shared tiny intimacies, a story about her childhood, a laugh about an embarrassing moment, a fleeting touch on his hand when emphasizing a point. Each of these moments was like a whisper of closeness, a subtle acknowledgement that they were not just strangers passing by. Every brush of her fingers left him with a tangible memory, as if her presence had imprinted itself onto him. But with every connection came hesitation. He wondered if he was misreading the signs. Was her warmth genuine interest, or just kindness extended to someone she barely knew? Every small touch, every meaningful glance, was tinged with uncertainty. The tension between what he felt and what he dared hope for created a quiet ache in his chest, one that mingled anticipation with fear. And yet, he found himself drawn further in, savoring every fleeting moment, every shared laugh, every unspoken understanding. This growing intimacy, subtle and delicate, began weaving an invisible thread between them, a thread he could feel tightening with each encounter, even as he struggled to interpret its direction. It was a dangerous, exhilarating feeling, and he knew that their next meeting would matter more than any before. The second encounter was no longer just a passing moment. It was the beginning of something fragile, tender, and profoundly human, a slow, quiet pull that neither of them fully understood yet. The days following their second meeting were a swirl of quiet anticipation and subtle longing. He replayed every word, every glance, every touch, analyzing them for meaning, searching for signs that she felt even a fraction of what he did. Then, one afternoon, a conversation, or rather, a comment, shifted everything. She mentioned him, another man, casual, almost offhand, yet it struck him like a sharp note in a familiar melody. He hadn't realized how fragile his confidence was until that moment. The words, simple as they were, left a cold weight in his chest, an unfamiliar tension that made his stomach knot. He tried to parse them carefully, telling himself he must have misunderstood, that her tone might not carry the significance he attached to it. Yet each time he thought of her smiling at someone else, laughing freely at his side, or mentioning moments they shared, the uncertainty gnawed at him. He found himself noticing her in ways that made the misunderstanding sting even more. The way she adjusted her scarf, the subtle curve of her smile, the tilt of her head as she spoke. Every gesture he had once interpreted as personal attention now seemed to belong to someone else. And yet, she wasn't cold or distant with him. On the contrary, she maintained her warmth, her easy laughter, the soft light in her eyes when they met his. That duality, the closeness he craved paired with an obvious attachment elsewhere, was confusing, frustrating, and painfully magnetic. In his own mind, he played the scenario over and over. Perhaps she was testing him. Perhaps she wasn't aware of what she was doing. Maybe he was overthinking everything, reading too much in his small gestures. Still, the knot in his chest tightened whenever he imagined her choosing someone else, leaving him as just a witness to the life she was building. Yet, despite the turmoil, the moments of connection they shared refused to fade. When her hand brushed his lightly as she handed him a pen, or when her laughter echoed in a quiet room, the world seemed to slow for a heartbeat. He noticed the warmth lingering in her touch, the unspoken reassurance in her glance. But these were fleeting, ephemeral, and constantly shadowed by the misunderstanding. The inner conflict became a constant companion. He wanted to confront her, to ask outright what her intentions were, but fear held him back. Fear of rejection, fear of breaking the fragile thread they already shared, fear of realizing that he had misunderstood entirely. He didn't want to risk losing even the smallest connection they had, even if it meant silently bearing the ache of uncertainty. And yet, the pull toward her remained irresistible. Every fleeting smile, every shared joke, every inadvertent touch drew him further in, despite the gnawing ache of doubt. The misunderstanding hung between them like a quiet shadow, a tension neither could fully acknowledge but both could feel, shaping the rhythm of their encounters. This moment, the first real fracture in his hope, was not dramatic in the conventional sense. There were no angry words, no confrontations. Instead, it was the subtle, almost imperceptible shift of perception, the realization that his heart might be reaching toward something that perhaps wasn't meant to be. And still, he couldn't pull away. He was caught in the delicate gravity of her presence, even as confusion and longing warred silently within him. The misunderstanding was the first real test, a quiet storm that would shape every step forward, every laugh, every glance, every heartbeat yet to come. After the misunderstanding, each encounter with her became a delicate balance between hope and quiet despair. He still found himself drawn to her warmth, the soft way she smiled, the gentle humor in her voice. Yet now every gesture carried a weight of tension he couldn't ignore. The closeness they had once shared now felt fragile, almost fleeting, like sunlight filtering through clouds. He noticed subtle signs that made his chest tighten. The way her hand rested briefly on someone else's arm, or how her laughter lingered a moment longer in another person's presence, sent small jolts of unease through him. Every glance she gave him was now measured, cautious, and it both thrilled and frustrated him. He longed for the easy intimacy they had before, but the unspoken barrier between them only seemed to grow. Even in casual conversations, tension hummed beneath the surface. A joke that would have once sparked laughter now carried the weight of unspoken emotions. Her soft touches, a hand brushing his while handing over a notebook, a fleeting shoulder bump in passing, felt heavier, charged with a longing he didn't dare name. And yet, her attention seemed partially elsewhere, as if he existed in a space slightly apart from the world she shared with someone else. His frustration wasn't just about her. It was about himself, about the helpless ache that came from wanting something so deeply yet not knowing if it could ever be his. He wrestled with the urge to pull back, to protect his heart, but every step away was met with the magnetic pull of her presence. The brush of her fingers, the warmth in her glance, the gentle sway of her movements, it all drew him in, even as he reminded himself to stay distant. There were moments when he caught himself staring a little too long, analyzing the way her eyes softened when she looked at him, or the subtle tension in her posture when she laughed at someone else's joke. Each time, a quiet frustration built within him, a mix of longing and helpless admiration. He knew he couldn't force her feelings, yet he also couldn't ignore the silent pull between them. The inner conflict became a constant hum in his chest. Every meeting, every smile, every accidental touch carried the potential for hope or heartbreak. He found himself walking on a tightrope, unsure whether the next interaction would bring clarity or deepen the ache. And yet he couldn't step off. Something in her presence demanded attention, demanded care, and demanded that he remain vulnerable even when it hurt. Even as frustration mounted, the subtle intimacy lingered. Tiny gestures of closeness that reminded him why he was drawn to her. A hand brushing his arm lingered a fraction longer. A smile held just a heartbeat too long, a shared laugh that seemed to echo only for them. Each moment was a small gift, yet it came wrapped in the frustration of unfulfilled longing. By now, the tension between them had become a rhythm he could no longer ignore. It pulsed beneath their interactions, shaping the space between them, making every glance and every touch meaningful. He realized that the frustration wasn't just about misunderstanding or misalignment. It was about care, about connection, about the quiet, powerful pull of someone who had already rooted herself in his heart. The slow burn of their relationship deepened here, not through overt romance, but through longing, unspoken emotion, and the aching desire for a closeness that remained just out of reach. And in that delicate tension, he understood that the real challenge had only just begun. The quiet tension between them had grown to a point where it could no longer be ignored. Every interaction carried weight. Every glance seemed to linger a heartbeat too long. Every touch left traces that neither could fully name. He realized that the subtle pull he had felt since their first encounter had matured into something far deeper, something he could no longer keep to himself. But approaching her with honesty was terrifying. The fear of rejection, of misunderstanding, of shattering the fragile connection they had, pressed on him with a heaviness he could barely bear. One afternoon, they found themselves alone, the world around them fading into background noise. She laughed at a small, shared joke, her eyes lighting up in a way that seemed to slow time itself. He noticed how her hand rested lightly on the table, the soft curve of her fingers illuminated by the afternoon sun streaming through the window. For a moment, he wanted nothing more than to reach out, to close the distance, to let her feel the warmth and sincerity he had held back for so long. Instead, he spoke cautiously, choosing his words with care. I hope I haven't misunderstood you," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. I feel like there's something between us, something I can't ignore." His words hung in the air, fragile yet charged with emotion, a delicate offering of his heart. She looked at him then, not with surprise, not with judgment, but with a softness that both comforted and terrified him. Her eyes lingered on his, as if measuring the depth of what he had just admitted. There was a pause, a quiet moment where the world seemed to hold its breath, where the space between them was thick with possibility. He could feel the subtle warmth of her presence, the way her breath shifted as she considered him, the gentle sway of her hair as she tilted her head. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet and measured. You might have misunderstood something," she said. The words were gentle, careful, but they carried a weight heavier than anything he had imagined. It wasn't rejection, not entirely, it was honesty. She explained, with a careful balance of kindness and restraint, that she couldn't offer him what he hoped for, that her heart and her choices were already tied elsewhere. Despite the sting of disappointment, he noticed the small gestures that spoke louder than her words. Her hand hovered near his for a moment, reluctant to retreat. Her smile, though tinged with regret, was warm, and her eyes held an unmistakable trace of care. Even in refusal, she showed a tenderness that made him ache with both longing and admiration. He realized then that this moment, the confession, the gentle refusal, was not a failure. It was a rare, intimate glimpse into her world, a window into her vulnerability, and a mirror for his own. He had been given the chance to be seen, to be acknowledged, to connect, even if the connection was not what he had hoped. As he walked away that day, the quiet ache in his chest was tempered by a strange sense of gratitude. He understood now that love was not always about possession or reciprocity. Sometimes it was about honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to feel deeply, even when the heart might not be fully returned. The thread between them had shifted, transformed from innocent attraction to profound understanding, a slow, bittersweet intimacy that neither could fully define, but both could feel. The weeks that followed her quiet confession were a delicate tension between hope and acceptance. Every encounter became a study in restraint, each smile, each glance, each small touch carrying weight he could no longer ignore. He had grown accustomed to the quiet ache in his chest, the pull toward her presence that neither fear nor caution could sever. But now, the unspoken truth loomed larger. Her heart was already tied to someone else, and he could feel it in the subtle shifts of her attention, in the way she spoke about him with ease and familiarity. It was on a late afternoon, sunlight spilling warmly across the room, that the moment arrived. He watched from across the space, a quiet observer to a reality he had long feared. She laughed at something the other man said, the sound spilling freely, her body relaxed and open in a way that made it clear she was at ease, truly at ease, with him. The warmth of her presence, once reserved in their interactions, was now directed elsewhere, and every small gesture carried the undeniable weight of choice. He felt a tightness in his chest, a mix of longing and resignation. The brush of her hand against his earlier that week, the fleeting warmth of her gaze in private moments, replayed in his mind like gentle echoes of what could have been. He had cherished every stolen smile, every delicate touch, every word spoken softly between them, and now he saw that they existed in a space apart from the life she had chosen. Yet even in witnessing her choice, there was a strange tenderness. She didn't dismiss him. She didn't belittle the connection they had shared. Her smiles, though now reserved for another, still carried a trace of warmth for him. When their eyes met, even briefly, there was an unspoken acknowledgement of what had existed, a quiet reverence for the moments they had shared. He realized that love could manifest in many forms, not just in possession or mutual choice, but in care, understanding, and memory. The moment of parting, subtle yet profound, lingered like a soft echo. She reached out, her hand brushing his in a gesture of farewell, not of intimacy, but of acknowledgement. It was gentle, fleeting, yet it carried the weight of unspoken words, gratitude, admiration, and a quiet regret. The warmth of her touch lingered on his skin, a reminder of the fragile thread they had shared, delicate and enduring even as it frayed at the edges. Walking away that day, he felt a strange mixture of heartache and respect. There was grief, yes, but also clarity. He understood that her choice did not diminish the depth of their connection. It merely reframed it. He had been granted a glimpse into her world, a chance to witness her vulnerability and her humanity, even if it was not fully directed toward him. The choice had been made, and with it came closure. The ache remained, but it was no longer sharp. It had softened into something tender, a quiet ache that reminded him of the beauty of fleeting connection. He realized that love was sometimes about acceptance, about holding affection without expectation, and about carrying memory with a soft reverence. In that final moment of understanding, he felt something profound. Even unrequited love could be gentle, warm, and transformative, leaving its imprint not in possession, but in the quiet expansion of the heart. Time, as it always does, began to smooth the sharp edges of the ache he had carried. The intensity of longing and frustration that had once consumed him softened into a quiet, reflective tenderness. He still thought of her, her laughter, the tilt of her head when she listened, the fleeting warmth of her touch. But those thoughts no longer pulled at him with the same desperate ache. They had become memories, delicate and bittersweet, shaped by the knowledge that some connections are meant to exist in moments, not permanence. He found himself recalling the subtle intimacies they had shared, the brush of her fingers against his hand, the soft weight of her presence beside him, the warmth in her eyes when she had allowed herself to be vulnerable. Each memory was vivid, yet instead of stinging, it carried a gentle comfort. He realized that the experience had changed him, made him more aware of nuance, more patient with his own emotions, and more attuned to the quiet language of connection. Walking through familiar streets, he would sometimes catch glimpses of her from afar. The way she carried herself, the grace in her movements, the soft curl of her smile. And though she was no longer part of his daily life, he no longer felt the pang of longing that had once accompanied such sightings. Instead, there was admiration, a quiet reverence for someone who had touched his life so profoundly, even in fleeting moments. He thought about the choice she had made, the man she had chosen. There was no bitterness, only understanding. Her decision had been hers alone, shaped by her heart and her life. And in accepting it, he had learned the most difficult and essential lesson of all, that love, is not about possession or control, but about respect, honesty, and the willingness to cherish someone even if they cannot be yours. There were evenings when he would sit quietly, replaying their conversations in his mind, noting the subtle gestures and unspoken signals. Each memory was layered with emotion, warmth, longing, subtle tension, but there was no torment. He had learned to hold affection gently, without expectation, to carry the imprint of another person with care rather than need. It was a maturity born of experience, shaped by the slow burn of connection that had been as intense as it was fleeting. In moments of reflection, he sometimes felt a quiet smile tug at his lips, remembering the small, tender moments, her hand brushing against his arm, the soft warmth of her presence nearby, the way her eyes had held unspoken understanding. Those moments had not belonged entirely to him, yet they had left an indelible mark. He understood now that even unrequited love could be beautiful, transformative, and sustaining in memory. As the story closed, he felt a sense of closure and peace. The thread of connection that had once drawn him so strongly toward her was no longer a pull of longing, but a quiet hum of gratitude. He carried it forward as part of himself, a testament to the depth of human emotion, the subtle power of intimacy, and the beauty of loving someone fully, even when the heart cannot be returned. And in that gentle acceptance, he discovered something rare and enduring, the quiet joy of having loved sincerely, deeply, and without expectation.